Well, hey, church, if you were here last week, you know that Ken Philbeck did a great job starting us off on a series that we're calling Ghosted about the book of Habakkuk. And when Ken started that message, he started off by saying some really nice things about me. He started that way, but I know Ken really well, and so I knew the nicer he was at the start about me, I knew that they was setting up a joke of some kind, and Ken didn't disappoint. And he showed this artificially and created picture of me that looked like an elf. And then he also basically called me a giant nerd. And then said, and I quote very directly, there's an actual quote, "Marcus is bald but hairy." Now, y'all might have heard a lot of that and said, wow, I wonder if Marcus was offended by that. I wasn't offended by any of that because basically it's all true. I am a huge nerd. In fact, I have only shown you a fraction of how nerdy I am because we're still pretty new at this, you and I together. And, so I'm kind of letting it out slowly. And you know what? Over the years, the hair on my head and the hair on my face have changed positions. And so it's also true. And so actually, I wasn't offended. The bottom line is, frankly, Ken was still holding back, and I love him for that. He was just setting up our next series, At the Movies, which is right around the corner. Very excited about that. And so I'm actually going to follow Ken's example, and I'm also going to give kind of a hint towards what's coming during At the Movies, the series that we get excited about, what God chooses to do through it every year. And so I'll say this about Ken. Ken is my good best friend. And even I know that's not something you can find around every corner. And what you can find around every corner, or at least the corner coming up, is At the Movies. 3 weeks away. Get excited. Go ahead and be thinking about the kind of friends you want to invite to see the kind of movies that God's going to use to do great things this summer. But today, we're going to continue in our series on the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk is a prophet. And what prophets did is they usually represented God on behalf, he spoke to the people on behalf of God, but Habakkuk was different. Habakkuk represented a faithful remnant of people, and he spoke on behalf of that remnant to God. Because that faithful remnant looked around at the world around them, and they saw injustice and pain and suffering, and they were confused about that and wondered essentially, fundamentally, where are you, God? Which is why we're calling our series Ghosted. Because that question, where are you, God? That is a question that many of us can relate to. Some of you can relate to it right now, or you've been through seasons where you've felt that way, and if you haven't yet, it's likely that at some point you will. And that feeling boils down to that sense of you want to believe. You want to believe with everything in you that God is good and that He's real and that He loves you and that He's powerful. And yet your experiences in your life don't seem to match what you want to believe. That's why Habakkuk, at its core, the question that it answers, the book answers is, what do you do when you want to believe that God is good, yet your life is not? That's ultimately what we are going to learn from Habakkuk. Even his very name points towards this, because the name Habakkuk means to wrestle, but it can also mean to embrace. And that's exactly what Habakkuk himself is doing. He's trying to embrace what he knows to be true of God, that He is good, that He is powerful, that He does love His people. But he's wrestling with the ways in which his lived experiences don't seem to match that truth. And it's that wrestling that makes the book of Habakkuk so real and so authentic to our own lived experiences. And so last week, we learned through Habakkuk chapter 1, the example of this prophet, what it looks like to ask bold, direct, difficult questions when our lived experiences do not match what we believe to be true about God. And that topic was raw and it was challenging, and that's exactly what it's meant to be. But if anything, today is going to be more challenging. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to follow Habakkuk through his journey, where he began with wrestling, where we want to end with embracing who God is. We're trying to follow that journey. So we're going to follow Habakkuk, starting with how to ask God bold questions when we have questions about His goodness and what He's doing. But today we're moving past how to ask, and today we're going to move to what Tom Petty knew was the hardest part, the waiting. Last week is how to ask. This week is how to wait. Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. he says this. This is Habakkuk speaking himself. He says, I'm going to stand. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. And then the Lord replies, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so the herald may run with it. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end, and it will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come, and it will not delay. Right at the beginning, what I want to point out is Habakkuk, he's very active. I mean, watch, he says, I'm going to stand, I'm going to station myself, I'm going to look. And I think that's noticeable because the gravitational pull, when we're experiencing something in our lives where we would say we're experiencing pain and confusion, the undertow is not to be active, it's actually to be passive. It's not to move towards God, it's actually to move away from him. It's to avoid, it's to compartmentalize. And the reason for that is kind of simple. It's really painful to focus on how lonely we are. It's painful to think about our children that are wandering, that we're losing relationship with. It's painful to think about the sicknesses that we're struggling with, the mental health issues that we have recurring, the crippling debt we're experiencing, the loveless marriage we feel like we're in. If that's hard enough to think about and focus on in itself, in a way, being a person of faith actually can feel even more difficult because you're thinking about all those things that are painful, and you also believe that there's someone who loves you and is powerful enough to do something about it and isn't. That's part of what makes this so painful. And so what people naturally do is they pull back. They stop going to church. They stop serving if they were. They stop being in Christian community, whether that's with a small group they're a part of or that's them just trying to avoid Christians that they feel like are going to give them those kind of like pat cookie, fortune cookie kind of answers to what they're going through. They stop having personal times of prayer. They stop reading their word. And often what begins that is not a sense of like bitterness and anger. It's actually a sense of heartbreak. That we're going through something painful and someone that we love can do something about it and he's not. But Habakkuk doesn't withdraw. He doesn't become passive. He's waiting on God, but he's showing that the way he does it is active and intentional, beginning with he seeks perspective. He intentionally seeks perspective. That's what it means for when he says that he's going to climb up on the watchtower, on the ramparts, that he's going to climb up into the watchtower. If you think about like an ancient city and its walls or a fort, fundamentally that's what a watchtower provides. It provides perspective. You know you have an enemy, but you don't know how much or how strong or how many. And so you climb up on the watchtower and you see how strong really is this obstacle? How strong really is this enemy? But you do the same thing and you find out about your friends. Do I have allies over the hill? Are they coming? Are there more for me than are against me? It's about finding perspective. That's what this metaphor indicates. It's about finding spiritual perspective. And when I think about that, I think about Paul. Paul was a leader of the early church, an apostle, meaning he spent time learning under Jesus himself. Paul planted churches, and much of our New Testament, kind of the second half of the Bible, was actually written by Paul to churches he had planted or churches he had visited or led at some point. And from those letters, from that correspondence, we know that Paul knew what it was like to experience a season of waiting on God. He knew what it was like to wrestle. In fact, if you look at the correspondence, I think the thing that kind of like jumps out most for those of you that know that the writings of Paul is the fact that at one point he writes about something that he referred to as a thorn in his flesh. And there's debate. There's been debate for centuries about what that refers to. Some people think it talks about like spiritual oppression that Paul is experiencing. Some people think it was kind of a physical ailment. There are even some hints in the Bible that maybe he was talking about having some kind of like eye disease. He was suffering a loss of vision. But what we do know about that thorn is that Paul begged God, pleaded with God, please God, take this out of my life. Heal me, free me, begging, pleading. And as far as we know, God never did. We don't know whether he did or didn't, but it never tells us that he did, which means as far as we know, Paul suffered from this his whole life as a follower of Jesus, which is even crazier because during that very time, God was using Paul to free other people from spiritual oppression. He was using Paul to heal other people of their physical sicknesses. Can you imagine being used by God to do that for someone else and at the same time begging God that he would do it in your own life and God saying no? Can you imagine what Paul's prayer life, what his interaction with God, what his internal monologue would have to look like? In addition to this, Paul experienced opposition. He experienced imprisonment. But what we know about Paul is that he also fought for spiritual perspective. I think of Romans 8. Romans 8:18, Paul says this. He says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." And when Paul wrote this, he wrote in ancient Greek. And in this word right here, the one that's translated as consider, when I say he fought for perspective, I mean it because that word actually means to calculate, to add up, to count up, which means that Paul intentionally was fighting for that spiritual perspective by reminding himself of what things were true even in the midst of his suffering, which means that he was reminding himself of things like this, that the true sickness, the sickness that could truly kill Paul, had already been healed by Jesus because that sickness was the sickness of sin. And the opposition that truly could have tripped Paul up, truly sunk him, truly ended him, was the opposition of death itself. But that had also been conquered by Jesus on the cross, which means that as much as he was suffering, as much as the circumstances of his life were not what he may have wanted them to be, that the true opposition, sickness, and pain of his life had already been dealt with by Jesus, by his grace, power, and love. And that perspective helped Paul in the midst of the waiting. And what's true of Paul is true of every single follower of Jesus. We can also fight for that perspective. That's not the only thing that Habakkuk tells us to do, though. The next thing that he shows as an example is to not only seek perspective, but to stand firm. Hear the tone of Habakkuk as he says this. He says, "I will stand at my watch. I will station myself on the ramparts." Do you hear him saying, I choose to stand. I choose to stand my ground. I want to say something direct to you. I want to say something that potentially will feel like I'm stepping on some toes. Just remember that whenever I do this, I'm always looking in the mirror and saying it to myself too. Okay? But here we go. If you're a follower of Jesus, that means that at some point in your life, you came to true spiritual perspective. You saw Jesus clearly and you saw yourself clearly. You saw Jesus' goodness and you saw your own wickedness. You saw Jesus' faithfulness and your own failures. You saw Jesus' power and your own weakness. And in seeing those things, you made the choice that you wanted to dedicate, to give, to ask Jesus to be the Lord of your life and to give your whole life over to him, to bend the knee, to make a clear choice that Jesus belongs on the throne of your life and you do not. You vacated that throne. You put him on that throne and you declared that you would trust, follow, and obey him no matter what circumstances we face in this life. And when you made that choice, you made that choice no matter what circumstances you face. Now, I think this metaphor of standing your ground, of climbing up on the ramparts, getting in the watchtower, is especially helpful given the context of like the military presence of our community. Every one of our worship centers are filled with soldiers and veterans and families of, and they can tell you that when you are a sentry on duty, it does not matter if you are tired or bored or stressed out. It doesn't matter if you're feeling sick. It doesn't matter if you're feeling sore. It doesn't matter. You got a lot of stuff going on in your personal life. You do not abandon your post. It doesn't matter what kinds of personal circumstances you have in your life. You stand your ground because you have chosen to do so, no matter the circumstances you face. And look, many of you, and I'm not saying this in a sense of it doesn't matter or it doesn't hurt. I'm not saying any of that stuff. I'm saying that I know that many of you feel ghosted. You feel like you are not getting much out of your Christian walk. You feel exhausted and confused and fed up. You've got a list of unanswered prayers that go back weeks, months, years, decades. I understand that. But what we must remember is that we had clear view of ourself and Jesus, and we made a choice to trust him, and nothing has changed about his trustworthiness, even if your circumstances are difficult. Can you imagine the court-martial proceedings for a soldier? Where he's being asked, why did you abandon your post? And he says, I just felt like I wasn't getting much out of it. And look, I don't want to diminish the true pain that it can feel like you're being ghosted by God. But I do want to elevate that you made a choice and a commitment to stand. So stand firm. John Newton is a pastor, was a pastor, I should say. He was an abolitionist. He was a hymn writer. He wrote Amazing Grace. And he once was written a letter from someone who said to him, I just don't feel like I'm getting much out of my Christian walk. He says, basically, I don't feel like I'm getting much out of my prayer life. And John Newton wrote back and he said something very direct. He said, I assure you, you will get nothing out of not praying. You're not going to get anything by abandoning your post. In the words of Peter to Jesus, to whom shall we go, Lord? What are you leaving your post to seek instead? And how can you trust that more than you can trust the one who died for your sins and rose again? Stand firm, because on those ramparts and at that watchtower is more hope for the future than anywhere else you will look. Stand firm. Habakkuk also says, next, something very simple, but I think it's very important. The Lord replies, because the Lord does reply. He does speak. And the Lord says, write down the revelation and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. And in other words, the next thing Habakkuk says when it comes to waiting on God is, listen. And I know that seems simple, but it's still crucial, because when we're in pain, and especially when we feel like we're in the presence of someone who could do something about that pain, we usually don't like to listen. We want to tell. Hey, bring my wandering kid home. Heal that person, they deserve it. Fix my marriage. And that's all understandable, but we have already walked through what it looks like to ask our bold questions, to place our feelings and our pain boldly and clearly before God. But when we do so, the next thing we are called to do is to listen. He speaks. He speaks through his word. He speaks through the indwelling Holy Spirit. He speaks through his other people, and he speaks through sermons. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me already and said, this landed at the perfect time. I needed this. God is speaking to you. He speaks, but he rarely shouts, which means that what we're called to do is, after we pour our hearts out and ask our bold and blunt questions, is then to set our own agendas down and tune our hearts and our ears to listen, because he rarely shouts, but he often whispers. And if you actually stop and listen, you will hear from him. And when you do, you will probably hear something along the lines of what God says next to Habakkuk. He says, for the revelation, and by that he's referring to his promise that he will act, that he will come, that he will show up, that his justice and his power and his glory and his might and his peace and his love and his mercy will show up in the situation that Habakkuk is experiencing, that it will come. But look what he says about it. It awaits in appointed time. Hold on to appointed time. It speaks of the end. It will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come, and it will not delay. How to wait on God and seeking perspective, standing firm, listening, and then there's kind of a challenge and an encouragement. The challenge is to be patient. The encouragement is, but you can do that with expectation. Because appointed time, when Habakkuk wrote this was ancient Hebrew. The word appointed time in Hebrew is moab. Moab, and it refers to God's perfect, unstoppable timing. And when I think of something that is unstoppably, like it's a time, and when it's time, it's unstoppable, I think of June 1st, 2013. Now, I'm about to tell you a story. I want you to know. It's just like a public service announcement, all right? When I tell a story that contains things that seem like they may be embarrassing towards a member of my family, I want you to know I always run these stories past family members because I'm not stupid, all right? And I know I can get a laugh out of you, but then I'm gonna return home and suffer. So, anytime you hear something in a story, you're going like, did Lauren know that he was gonna tell this story? Yes, she does, and gave her stamp of approval for me to tell you what happened on June 1st, 2013, which was the birth of my firstborn child. And on June 1st, we woke up and Lauren started to experience contractions. And we just kind of followed the plan. And honestly, it was about as smooth for most of the time as you could have asked for. She started experiencing contractions. We started timing them. They got closer together. We got the go bag. We got in the car. We headed to the hospital. We got checked in. And for the next several hours, we did everything we were supposed to do. And Lauren, frankly, was a saint. She was awesome. For hours after hours of literally building pain and discomfort, she was sweet, she was funny, she was kind, she was the best. Until it was time. Until Moab occurred. And by that, look, if you've ever given birth or you've ever been present for the birth of a child, you know what I am talking about. When it is time to give birth, it feels unstoppable. Like everything biological in you is like, yes, it is time. And that's exactly how Lauren felt until the nurses that were in the room with us said, no, don't push. The doctor isn't here yet. And when that was announced, Lauren changed. She changed, okay? Really, the better word for it is she snapped and she became angry, very angry. That first contraction after they were like, don't push, that first contraction after that, she balled up her fists and started punching me in the chest. And she had that like pregnant lady strength. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like it hurt, you know? And so like I was like laughing awkwardly, like, ha, 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 you know? And I didn't know what else to do. I mean, the nurses were in the room. I wasn't gonna like roll up my sleeves and be like, don't worry, honey, I got this, you know? Like, so I just was kind of like taking it. I didn't know what else to do. The next contraction hits, and she reached up and she grabbed me by the front of my shirt and she pulled me down to eye level. And she said, where is the doctor? No, I'm sure he's close, sweetie pie, honey. You know, keep breathing. Great. All right, contraction passes. She lets go of me. Next contraction, she grabs me again. She pulls me down eye level and she says, I want to bite you. Hand to God, y'all. Hand to God. All right. So at that point, I'm the one looking at the doctors being like, where is the doctor, right? Or the nurse, like, where is the doctor? You get that doctor in here. All right, contraction passes. She lets me go. Next contraction, she grabs me again. I should have left. I should have moved. Not left, I should have left. Should have moved. She grabs me again. She pulls me down close. At this point, she's not speaking. She's just growling. And she just says, I want to bite your hand. And then she opened her mouth like this. Yeah. Now, some of you are under the impression that I'm an intelligent man. I am not an intelligent man. I am an idiot, and I can prove it because I stuck my hand. I did. the meat of my hand into her jaws, okay? And I kid you not, I distinctly remember thinking, at least I'm already in the hospital. That's actually my thought. All right, okay. So, fortunately, before the next contraction, a nurse taps me on the shoulder, gives me the you're an idiot look, which was fair. And she handed me a rolled up washcloth. And I took that and I put it in between Lauren's teeth. And when the next contraction hit, have you ever seen a big dog get a hold of a sock? You know what I'm talking about? The head snapping thing? Like a shark with a baby seal, y'all. And I would have lost at least a couple of fingers. Now, I have not seen Lauren like that. I've never seen her like that before. I haven't seen her like that since. But it was Moab, all right? It was time. And when there's an appointed time, you can't force it to come. But then the other side of it is, when it's time, you can't stop it. Now, God's timing and his power are perfect. You may be facing something. You may be facing something where you are just fully aware of your need for him. There is something broken in your life that you can't fix. There's something sick in your life that you can't heal. There's something missing you can't provide, or something that needs to stop that you can't end. And you are fully convinced that you need God, but he is missing his window. He's going to be late. But I'm trying, please, remind yourself of this truth, that it is not our appointed time. We don't appoint the time. He does. And we cannot force it. But the other side of that is to remember that when it is his time, nothing in all of creation can stop his power, his love, his mercy, his grace, his comfort, his help from getting to you when it is the right time for it to arrive. You cannot force it, but nothing can stop it. So though it linger, wait for it. Though he linger, wait for him. One of the first names God has given in the Bible is the name El Roi. It means the God who sees. And that name was given to God by a woman who had been abandoned, who had been ghosted by everyone in her life that was supposed to take care of her. Her name was Hagar. And seemingly abandoned by everyone else, hearing what felt like silence even from God, she waited. And in the waiting, she named him the God who sees. And he does see. He sees you, and he sees your situation, and he loves you, and his arm is not too short. But what we must remember is that he is the one who sees. He sees you, and he sees everything else. And if we saw what God sees, we would ask for exactly what he gives. Both what he gives and when he chooses to give it. So though he lingers, wait for him. You can't force it. But when it is time, nothing and no one can stop it. So wait for him. Wait the way that Habakkuk shows us, the way that God through his word shows us. Seek perspective, stand firm, listen, and have patient expectation. And don't wait. Like when you're waiting, what I mean by that is, of course, wait on God, but don't wait to be active in your waiting in the way that we're talking about it. For some of you, before you leave this service, you need to climb up on the ramparts. You need to climb up into the watchtower. You need to commit the fact that you are going to return to standing your ground and looking and listening for God with patient expectation. And what that could look like is every one of our spaces has these prayer stations. Those are your ramparts. That is your watchtower. Some of you, before the day is over, need to plant yourself on your knees, face down before God, committing to listen to him, to hear what he has to say, to remember that his goodness, to fight for that spiritual perspective, to return to standing firm as you wait for him. Make a choice to do that today. And then make a choice to return to those ramparts day after day after day as you wait for his perfect timing. And I want you to know, I want you to remember this, please, with me, that when you are waiting on him, he is not passive, he's not absent, he is active. His delays are not his denials. His silence is not his absence. And he, because he is good, God doesn't waste our waiting. Now, Bible scholars who love the Bible, study the Bible, they have noticed that there is a similarity between Habakkuk and another man in the Bible whose name is Job. Habakkuk, when we first meet Habakkuk, he's already in the midst of his suffering. When we first meet Job, Job isn't experiencing suffering at all. In fact, Job is richly blessed, and he's completely and totally obedient. He loves God. He's doing everything seemingly that he should do. So when we see Job, that's where he is, but then the veil gets pulled back and we see this incredible conversation between God and our spiritual enemy, Satan. And Satan makes an accusation towards Job. This is the accusation. He says, God, the only reason Job is obedient is because you're blessing him. Because he doesn't really love you, God, he just loves your stuff. And if you took that from him, he'd abandon his post. If he went through a season of waiting, he would not stand firm. And then we watch Job go through that season. And I'm telling you, there are so many examples, not just of Job and Habakkuk in the Bible. There's many other examples as well. There are examples of people around you who have gone through seasons of waiting in the seats of our different campuses as well. People who went through those seasons and were faithful, and because they weren't following and serving God to get something from him. They were following and serving God because he's worthy, because he's good. And if you hear that and you go, well, I want to have that same kind of faith, I want to have that same kind of foundation, you can. But the truth is that strength is often built through seasons of waiting. It's in the waiting that strength is built. It's formed in that way. And in those seasons, yes, we're asking God questions, but he's asking us a question too. When we experience pain, we experience that frustration and that confusion. When we're in this season of waiting, God is asking us a question. This is it. The question is simply this: did you enter this relationship to serve me, or to get me to serve you? And you'll find out. In a season of waiting, you'll find out. As the things that God so graciously gives us seem to be pulled away, you will discover whether or not you are following and loving Jesus for who he is, not what you hope to get from him. It's in the waiting for God's perfect timing, for his Moab, that this was formed in Habakkuk and Job and Hagar and Joseph and David and Daniel and Paul and Peter and John, and on we can go. And the same thing can be formed in you, that when that perfect timing arrives and God's justice and mercy and love and grace and power show up in this situation that you so desperately want to see him show up in, when that happens and the darkness lifts, you will find that lump of coal that was your faith has been made into a diamond. Strong and beautiful and unflappable in a way that was not true of you before that season of waiting. And you'll know that the foundation of your relationship with Jesus is not about what he can give to you. It's about the fact that you have seen him for who he truly is, and know that no one else is worthy the way he is worthy of your love, of your devotion, of your trust. Because as you fight for your own patience, do you know what you'll see? You'll see the patience of God. You'll see how you're the one that's impatient. You're the one that's unfaithful. You're the one that's always trying to force it. You're the one that's abandoning your post. And how does God respond? Does he look at you and go, all right, well, just passively steps back and says, they'll either figure it out or they won't? No, God is active. He pursues us. He leaves the 99 to find the one. He sees you in your season of waiting. It's why he's brought this very message to you when you needed it most. He pursues. This has always been who he is. It's what he is right now, and it's what he has always been. In fact, let's remind ourselves of the greatest example of God's perfect timing, where Galatians 4 says, but when the right time came, when the perfect time came, when God's perfect timing came, nothing could stop him from sending his son, born of a woman, subject to the law. God sent Jesus to buy freedom for us who were slaves to the law so that he could adopt us as his very own children. This is the perfect timing of God. Though it linger, wait for it. Though it linger, wait for him. To whom else would you go? Whose love is greater than a God who would give his one and only Son for us? Wait for him. Wait for him. And be confident that when his timing arrives, nothing will keep him from you. Father, thank you. Thank you for the ways that you break into our lives, into history, into this world, into pain and injustice, into these seasons of waiting. So many of us can point to the times where we felt like you were silent, you were absent, but then you arrived. And when you arrived, you did more than we could ask or imagine. And there are so many testimonies of that in people's personal lives, but we can look to the greatest testimony of that in the coming of Jesus. That you met our greatest and deepest needs. That you have saved us through your Son. And so help us to fight for that spiritual perspective. Remind ourselves that our greatest threats, sicknesses, obstacles, and enemies have already been conquered by Jesus. Help us, Father, to stand firm on who we know you to be. Help us to listen and hear your whisper. Thank you for speaking to us today. And help us, God, as we wait on you. Do so with patience, but expectation, knowing that when you choose your perfect timing, nothing will keep you from moving in power and might for your glory and for the benefit of those you see and love. Father, I believe that you could be doing that very thing in this room right now. In your perfect timing, today is the day that people will see you for who you truly are and make a choice to dedicate their lives to you, knowing that you are the only one who is worthy and the only one who has fought the fight of our greatest needs. We love you, Lord, and we ask now, I ask now, and we ask now that you would help us see you for who you truly are. Remove anything from us that gives spiritual blindness, spiritual deafness, and speak to us and reveal yourself to us now. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.